All right, let's jump right in. We're going to talk about something that affects every single one of us, but maybe not in a way you've thought about before. I'm talking about the hidden connection between the food we eat, things like meat and dairy, and the water that comes out of our taps.
So really think about that for a second. What does your dinner have to do with your drinking water? It sounds kind of random, right? But the answer is, well, that's pretty complicated. We're about to pull back the curtain on how modern farming has this huge and often totally unseen effect on our water.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll pinpoint where the problem even starts. Then we'll look at what's actually lurking in the water. After that, we'll get into why it matters for our health, what we can do about it, and finally, what this all means for the future. Let's get into it.
All right, first things first, where does all this pollution actually come from? Well, the short answer is it all starts with how we raise livestock, and I mean on a massive industrial scale. Let's dig into the details.
Believe it or not, how this all kicks off is pretty simple. It really comes down to livestock waste. We're talking about everything: manure, the water they use to wash down the facilities, even leftover feed. Now, picture that stuff, but on the enormous scale of today's mega farms. When you mix that with waste management that just can't keep up, well, you basically got a perfect storm for pollution. Okay, so we know this waste is getting out into the environment, but what's in it that's so bad? What's the big deal? Well, this is where we start to look at the invisible culprits that are making their way into our water.
It basically boils down to three main threats. First up, you've got nutrients, specifically way too much nitrogen and phosphorus. Then there are the pathogens, the nasty stuff like E. coli and salmonella. And then there's the third one, which might actually surprise you: chemicals. We're talking about antibiotics and hormones that are used on the farm.
So remember those nutrients I just mentioned, nitrogen and phosphorus? Well, when they get into the water, they cause something called eutrophication. You can think of it like this. It's a classic case of too much of a good thing. The nutrients act like fertilizer for algae, causing these huge, explosive blooms. But then, all that algae dies and decomposes, and that process just sucks all the oxygen out of the water. This creates what scientists call dead zones, where fish and pretty much anything else just can't breathe.
And here's where it gets even more concerning. It's not just the natural waste we have to worry about. The fact is, antibiotics and hormones are used all the time in modern agriculture, and they don't just, vanish. They get washed away, seeping into our rivers, our lakes, and the entire ecosystem. And that, as you can imagine, has some pretty serious knock-on effects.
Okay, so this is clearly bad news for fish and the environment. But what about us? Why should you and I be concerned? This is where it really hits home.
The impact on people can be pretty direct. We're talking about nasty waterborne illnesses, things like diarrhea, serious bacterial infections, even just skin problems from contact with contaminated water. And yeah, on top of that, you've got the whole ecosystem being thrown completely out of whack.
But honestly, this right here might be the scariest part of all: antibiotic resistance. When all those antibiotics from farms wash into our water, they create the perfect breeding ground for bacteria that can't be killed by our medicines anymore. You've probably heard of them: superbugs. This is not some far-off sci-fi problem. It's a real global health crisis happening right now. It's making it harder to treat infections we used to consider simple. This goes way beyond just a water issue. It's a full-blown public health emergency.
Wow. Okay, that sounds pretty bleak, I know. But it's not hopeless. Not at all. The good news is we actually know what to do about it. The solutions are there. So the big question becomes, how do we actually fix this?
All right, let's shift gears and talk about solutions, because there are real practical things we can do that would make a massive difference. You can really break it down into 4 main actions. Number 1, treat the waste. This means using systems like lagoons or even biodigesters, which can actually capture that waste and turn it into clean energy. Pretty cool, right? Number 2, create buffers. This is as simple as planting protective zones of trees and vegetation between farms and rivers. Number 3, get a handle on the chemicals. We need to be much smarter about how we use antibiotics and hormones. And finally, number 4, keep an eye on things. None of this matters if there isn't regular monitoring from authorities to make sure everyone is actually following the rules.
And all of this really brings us to the heart of the matter. Look, the goal here isn't to get rid of farming. It's about finding a better, smarter, and more sustainable path forward.
And if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this quote right here. It all comes down to balance. We absolutely need a strong livestock industry to feed a growing world, but we can't let it destroy our environment and our health in the process. Finding that sustainable middle ground is the only way this works for everyone in the long run.
So that leaves us with the final big question. The challenge is huge, no doubt about it, but the solutions, they're right there within our grasp.
The real question is, do we have the collective will to actually put them into action? Can we figure out how to protect our water while still feeding the world? That's something for all of us to think about.